acknowledge that the content in these sessions can be difficult at times, and it can be triggering for some, depending on where you are in your life and what your background is. But please know that you're not alone. Always seek out counsel and support, lean on each other. And of course, if you or anybody you know is in immediate harm, please reach out and contact 911 or some other form of support that you can get that's more immediate. So with all of that, I think we will get into the formal part. Let's see how our numbers are going. Okay, we're almost at 40, and we did have 80 people RSVP, so we'll probably have some folks sort of duck in and out throughout the session here. All right. So as those of you who know, I do come from the Mohawk Nation in Tyendinaga. And so I would like to say Segon this morning. I'm learning more of my language and incredibly uncomfortable with pronunciations, but getting there each and every day. And I would like to start off today by offering EJ, and I know you can't reach it through the screen, but I do promise you I will be giving it to you next time I see you. But will you accept this tobacco to speak with us today? Yes, wonderful. Thank you very much. And next, I would like to invite Melanie Hooker to offer us a land acknowledgement this morning. Over to you, Melanie.
Thank you. I am so honored today to share with you this land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we are gathering today, no matter where we are, on the traditional territory of Indigenous people. I want to acknowledge the long-standing contributions of Indigenous people to what is now known as Ontario. And I want to acknowledge the history of treaty making and note that hundreds of years after they were signed, the treaties between Indigenous people and first settlers remain relevant today. We also acknowledge that we are all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrant, either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Today, we pay tribute to the ancestors of those of African and Indigenous origin and descent. In the city of Toronto, we acknowledge that this is the ancestral land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now considered home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I am not of Indigenous descent, although I am a strong ally and a parent of a child with Indigenous roots in the Algonquin, Métis, and Cree nations. I am a lifelong learner and have a natural curiosity about the world and all that it is made up of. When my daughter was born in 2006, her father was very proud that our daughter was now a part of his Indigenous heritage. Through her life, her father has taught her many things about nature, plants, and animals that always amazed me, because although he was not school taught in the academic sense, he always had an uncanny and intuitive sense in regards to nature, healing, and animals. My daughter has always been a strong advocate for anyone that is considered a vulnerable population, and she has continued to advocate on social justice issues in many areas, but is most passionate about Indigenous rights. We have had some very difficult conversations around truth and reconciliation, as well as discussions around the far too many missing and murdered Indigenous women. She has been learning more about her roots and participates now in an Indigenous advocates group in her high school to bring more attention to Indigenous history and studies that are offered in the TDSB. I learned from her and others about traditional ways to better improve my understanding and appreciation of the Indigenous peoples that belong to the land that we now stand on. I commit to continue to bring attention to matters that affect the Indigenous people by speaking my voice about wrongs that have been committed and being open to continual learning and advocacy about issues that affect the Indigenous community.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Now, and I was sharing with some of the folks on the call before we got started that it's been an incredible journey for me getting to know more people within Community Living Toronto who are connected and are choosing to be allies and learning their stories. And I just recently learned about Melanie's, and it's an honor and a privilege to be on this journey with you as well. So thank you for giving that today. And so our speaker today is not unfamiliar to those of us at Community Living Toronto. We are just incredibly grateful that EJ has become a part of our lives here and has been so generous with his time and energy and sharing his stories with us. But I'd like to formally introduce EJ Kwandibens, also known as Anna Kikesek. is a member of the Loon clan and is of Northern Woodland Anishinaabe Ojibwe of the Wabadunga White Sand First Nation community, which is part of the Robinson Superior 1850 Treaty region located 21 hours north of Toronto. EJ has worked across many sectors, including education, correctional services, social services, child welfare, and mental health. He advocates the power of change through Indigenous cultural modalities. The values and principles guiding his Indigenous ways of knowing and being stems from intergenerational knowledge transfer. Thank you so much for joining us today. And without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Well, that was a wonderful opening. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to the team for inviting me on board once again to sit with you and speak with you on today's topics, which happens to deal with National Indigenous Day, Indigenous Month, but more importantly, the focus on Canada Day and where we're at now and what does that look like, and all of those wonderful conversations that go along with that topic. So first off, I want to just be able to share or acknowledge how, most of us in this call are going to celebrate Canada Day. We have an upcoming long weekend, which is exciting. And we're going to celebrate it in the way that we would typically celebrate it, right? So either going to camp or going to, we may not be able to have campfires, but going to camp and being amongst friends and perhaps doing fireworks, and maybe for some having a few drinks and whatnot, and just having a good old time. And oftentimes in my conversations with a lot of non-Indigenous folks, it essentially just becomes like any other holiday, a party, right? It becomes a party of getting together and just letting loose and removing yourself from your day-to-day routine schedules. And that is fine, and that is great. And if that's what you need to do, then do that. When it comes to Indigenous folks or the Indigenous community, and I must be very clear, I don't speak on behalf of the Indigenous community, so I'm only one voice. But in my conversations within our community, a lot of how should I say this, conversations around Canada Day continues to be the same, which is not so positive. And that is our reality. That is the Indigenous community's way of looking at that particular day, perhaps differently from mainstream, right? So I know a lot of folks in the community will protest Canada Day, and that is an individual choice. Much like, for example, those in Quebec, right? Quebec doesn't celebrate Canada Day, right? In fact, July 1st happens to be the day that they use as their moving day to distract from the celebrations of Canada Day in their own personal actions of protest, right? So they don't celebrate Canada Day, at least for a greater percentage of Quebecers. That is kind of interwoven in their thread of understanding with regard to how they choose to respond to or acknowledge Canada Day. And I recently, about a year to 2 years ago, I learned this, and I thought, wow, that is an interesting practice, is that you cannot move or change your lease agreement unless it's July 1st. And all the movings that do take place happens to be on July 1st. So I found that very interesting. And it's not any different from how perhaps some of the Indigenous community handles Canada Day. People have chosen to just, not be a part of festivals, not be a part of the Wild Buffalo Bill days of performing and playing quote unquote Indian for mainstream on large stages, although there are some that do. But most of our community tends to go to ceremonies or functions that relate to ceremonial practices and that sort of stuff, trying to remove ourselves away from what Canada views as a great celebration. And the great celebration comes from the birthing of Canada, right? That is why most people celebrate. It is the birthing of Canada in its official definition. But you'd be surprised of how many people really have no clue how that was created, in terms of the effects of the original peoples of this territory. Or when I say this territory, I'm saying of Canada as we know it. And that's when you start bringing in these conversations and having these discussions with some people, people just sometimes just choose not to want to believe or listen. And that is fair enough. That is their choice. But again, I've had conversations with folks who chose to just ignore it, say that did not exist, and then they, on the other breath, they're trashing the Indigenous community without learning and understanding the history that has brought us to where we are now. So you can have an opinion, you can have a view, but it's also important to educate yourself and understand the true history that has taken place with regard to how Indigenous people have been viewed and treated in the history timeline. Now, I'm not saying that all of you who are in this call today bear any guilt or should ever carry any guilt for the atrocities and the histories that have taken place with Indigenous people. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that we all have a responsibility to be mindful, to educate ourselves, to be open-minded, and to continuously learn of the truths that have transpired on this traditional territory we call Canada, right? And to not do that is shameful, right? And I stand by that statement because a lot of people just choose to ignore what has transpired. Oh, that was a long time ago. That didn't take place. And so it's not relevant today. Well, it's extremely relevant today because that, for example, in my own lifetime, my own experiences as an Indigenous person, that is all I know. All the histories and the difficulties and the challenges, the systems and the policies that have been created, which were intended to quote unquote kill the Indian, my family is the living legacy of that system. And so that is all I know. And so for someone to say that that did not exist, what they're saying is that I don't exist. And that continuous erasure and that kind of mindset is quite alive and well today with a lot of people. And so this is why a lot of folks like myself as Indigenous cultural educators and others in community do the work and advocacy that we do to speak to truth, to highlight some of the issues that have transpired, not with the intentions of pointing the finger and blaming and trying to make people feel guilty for the history. That is never the goal. The goal is always to enlighten and to bring to light the difficulty truths that have transpired in our country. Now, don't get me wrong. I used to protest against Canada Day myself, and when Canada Day starts kind of getting its momentum rolling, I would write something on my Facebook or on Instagram saying that I am not Canadian. I am Northern Woolin Anishinaabe. I am from the northwest region of Obabuka Bay, which happens to be situated on the 1850 Robinson Superior Treaty Territory. I am Northern Woolin Anishinaabe. I am not Canadian. And that was my line that I would always post because it's important to understand that while we have the acknowledgement of what we call Canada, there were original peoples that were here way before Canada was ever born. And that erasure or disregard of those original peoples then continued to happen today. And so that is kind of like a subtle way of me, maybe not so subtle, a direct way of me being in my protesting type of mind, and how I choose to use the power of my words to be very clear that although we live in the country of Canada and we are Canadian citizens, or at least some of us are, because we're in the geographical region of Canada, that some of us don't identify as Canadian. And most Indigenous folks fall in that category. For example, not speaking on behalf of the Haudenosaunee people, but many of the Haudenosaunee people and friends of mine who are Haudenosaunee also are the type of people, the type of nation of people that choose to protest under the definition of what is defined as Canadian. They have their own, quote unquote, we use the word citizen very loosely, but their own citizen card that identifies they are a nation of people, a sovereign nation of people within a nation. And that's a pretty strong statement because it speaks to how they were always here. They haven't gone anywhere, and they are taking stake to their nation of people that happens to be originally in the area that they come from, but happen to be in the country that is now known as Canada. And I admire that because I'm going to go back to the reference of Quebec, for example. Quebecers during the times of separation and all that type of issue regarding language and sovereignty and whatnot, very real issues to the French people. Language has always been one of the main conversations for the French people. That's what sets them aside. And I had a conversation with a number of folks. Well, actually, it was my ex's family, and they were just not seeing the point I was trying to make with regard to a sovereign nation within a nation. And I use them as an example. You're in the province of Quebec. You're arguing the notion of language and sovereignty that happens to be a sovereign nation within a nation, which is the country of Canada. But what about the original peoples in this territory? You are speaking and arguing about the issue of language. The Indigenous people are speaking and arguing the issue of acknowledgement of their mere existence, not to mention language and customs and practices and whatnot. So both the Indigenous folk of Quebec and the French-speaking people of Quebec are arguing over the same thing. And then this conversation came up about separating from Canada. And my point is, it'll never happen. It will never happen because now we have Indigenous folks at the table that are exerting, affirming their voices that we have a right to be at the table of conversation. If there's ever going to be a conversation of separating, we must be at the table, and we will not be in support of that. Because when France created the friendship treaty between France and Britain, the Indigenous people were left out of the conversations because they were viewed lesser than. And so they weren't a part of the conversation that created the province that we know today as Quebec. I'm sharing that only because it's the same argument that we are having in other nations across Canada. You know, I'm of mixed heritage, right? So I am Northern Woodland Anishinaabe and I am French. And I identify more with my Indigenous community because I was raised on my Indigenous community, by my Indigenous community, customs and practices, that I don't really know too much about my French side, but I also acknowledge the need to be aware that I am also mixed heritage. And so, but when we speak about communities who are protesting, and for many different reasons, against the state of Canada, what we're saying is, we are here. Acknowledge us, hear us, validate us. We're not going anywhere, so let's learn to sit at the table together and have truthful and honest conversations so that we can achieve whatever the goal is at that time during those conversations that result in protest. Most of the issues that relate to protest deal with land and treaty and the responsibilities to the Crown to Indigenous folks. And those treaties, and let's change the word treaties to the word contracts. Everybody gets what contracts are. Legal binding contracts between two parties. And when one party does not adhere or follow through with their part of the bargain, they are a breach of their contract. So when we look at it from that perspective, the Crown, the federal government of Canada, are in breach of their contracts. And this is why we see these heightened conversations, these protests, the shutdowns of Trans-Canada highways and track lines, because we have to take the position, you are going to hear us, and we are going to force you to sit down and talk and work with us. And yes, it creates a disruption for everybody else who perhaps are allies and support the community. But this is the necessary evil that most of our communities have to go through. And so the reason why I'm sharing all that is because when we look at Canada Day, there was a time before where these protests were across Canada in protest against Canada, because we were getting snail pace results with regard to the issues that we were facing, whether it's clean drinking water, whether it's affordable housing, or housing, never mind affordable housing, housing, or the education, or whatever the case is. So we would oftentimes see these types of protests transpire across Canada. And most people in society who are not familiar with the issues that we face with just say, oh, quote unquote, the Indians are at it again. I wish they would just go away. They're such a nuisance, such a waste of time, and a waste of tax-paying dollars. That happened a long time ago. Doesn't relate now. Well, all that is transpired to date is a result of what was not being honored with those contracts, with those original treaties. And so when we have people start learning about those relationship buildings and those treaties that were established, it is the belief that people start learning these accurate truths, and perhaps the views of viewing our community of being lesser than will start to kind of lessen. It seems like it's an upward battle. We go through these conversations every time when it comes to Canada Day. I will say that, in my own opinion, yes, it's kind of cool being Native nowadays. It's kind of cool being Indigenous nowadays, because people are, excuse the pun, on the bandwagon now. And maybe the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, kind of probably helped facilitate these conversations. Maybe the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women inquiries have also facilitated these conversations. So it's been kind of cool being Indigenous in the past 4 or 5 years. But I get so tired of playing India. I get so tired of having to be viewed as the expert of the other person's issues. Why can't the ones who carry these issues of ignorance and bias and prejudice and hate do your own work? Why do you have to deflect and put that onus on me? Right? I'm just generalizing this conversation because a lot of people in our Indigenous community, especially when it comes to Indigenous Month and Canada Day, we get called upon by people who, or organizations who just need to do the checkbox on their forms, that they've engaged the Indigenous community checkmark. I'm not saying that Toronto Community Living is one of those organizations. That's not what I'm saying. But there are those communities out there that do. And then we never hear back from them, right? And I think this is the conversation I think that we need to be having, is that let's not just focus on the month of Indigenous Month and all that transpires during that month. Let's carry on that momentum throughout the year so that people are continuously learning throughout the year, both professionally and personally. And I think that needs to change. I think that is the direction I think that we need to start looking at when we talk about education. But going back to the original point about how we look at Canada Day and why that we, in our own little individual ways, perhaps protest that day. It's no different from the Quebecers and how they try to protest and do protest the issue of sovereignty within a nation. And so I find it very exhausting, to be honest, to let's just use Ashbridges Bay, for example, here in Toronto, on the east side of Toronto here. They're going to be obviously having their fireworks as they normally do, the end of the long weekend, and we'll get an influx of people. And the moment that, because a lot of us Indigenous folks, we tend to wear things that are very much from our culture, right? That pride comes out, ironically, pride. But when we come into contact with people in these large crowds, people always feel the need to have to come up and try to, I personally think it's guilt speaking, but they come up and they try to justify these issues that our communities are facing. Or it almost comes across as patronizing, disingenuous. And then he asked a silly question, oh my goodness, what are you doing for Canada Day? Right? I mean, like, I happen to be because I'm walking my dog, right? Not because I'm here for the fireworks, right? But I guess my point is that some people become very uncomfortable when interacting with some Indigenous folks on, for example, a day like Canada Day. That guilt seems to come out. And I say guilt because you hear it in the tone of the choice of words that are being spoken, right? And then this view of us being not Canadian, right? Or this view that you are Indigenous, but you don't celebrate Canada Day. So who are you and what are you all about and why are you here? And, so this is a very common issue that I and many folks experience with regard to Canada Day. And as I mentioned, it becomes exhausting. It's very tiring. And sometimes I just don't even want to have a conversation with people, right? Let's be honest. But when I take a step back and remove all the bias, the prejudice, the ignorance, the hatred, there are some real nice, kind, gentle, open, willing to learn, embracing people in our community. So I mustn't generalize that the entire population shares these views of how they view Indigenous communities. That's not okay. That's not the case. There are wonderful people out there. There are allies in our communities that are supporting us and speaking to the issues and learning and educating themselves and having conversations with people when they come into contact with somebody with wrong or incorrect information. So that's the responsibility of an ally, is when information is being conveyed and you know it to be untrue, you as an ally have a responsibility to speak up, right? Much like anybody who struggles with some type of disability or the stigma associated with any kind of disability or any type of illness or ailment, I have a responsibility as a community citizen. If I come in contact with somebody who's speaking ill and of untruths, I have a responsibility to say, excuse me, like, who are you? No, this is not accurate. This is not fair. This is not appropriate. You need to walk away. You need to educate yourself. I have an equal responsibility as is with all of the other allies to our community, right? So Canada Day is it's an interesting conversation that continues to be had. Has it improved? Not really. Not really. Within the Indigenous community, I think those issues will always be there. I think those issues of being viewed separate from Canada will always be there until society and the government truthfully, honestly, genuinely acknowledges the true history and the true reconciliation practices that need to be done. And I'm not just talking about throwing a dollar bill in front of us and saying this is part of the reconciliation process. No, that's not that. It's not always about money, right? It's about the action. It is about, if you're viewing us and when people talk about their land acknowledgements, okay, let's talk about a land acknowledgements for a moment. We want the same equalities as all of the executives. We want the same equalities as those in the healthcare field or in the law field. We want to be able to have shared resources. We don't want the positions that are in these corporations that are just cleaning toilets. And no disrespect for anybody who cleans toilets. That's a hard, humbling job to do. But the point is that a lot of these corporations, a lot of these entities that are here for profit, for example, feel they're going to do their checkbox because they've engaged the community, the Indigenous community, by hiring them. And what are the positions that they hire them as? Janitors, people who clean toilets, take out the garbage. These are these positions that our community, Indigenous community, are holding on. And we're supposed to be very grateful for them. But what about those who are qualified and capable of being executives? Those who are qualified, capable of being, legal representations to these corporations, or management, or whatever the case is. You rarely see that. We talked about briefly, Angela, about going into Rama, for example, right? So you go into Rama, at least this was not so long ago. You go into Casino Rama, for example. Do you see an Indigenous person in any of those high-ranking positions? Zero. And if they do, it happened to be within the last 30 days then, because it doesn't exist. But you will see our Indigenous folks behind the scenes where people cannot see them, cleaning up those toilets, cleaning up the garbage. So when we talk about reconciliation, it's about viewing us as equals. And when we view each other as equals, then the playing field becomes fair, right? But we haven't even gotten to that point yet, because society still views our community as lesser than the grass, the ground, the sand that we walk on. And until that changes, we will never see people in my community in these positions of power. This is why we are seeing our own communities, our own Indigenous communities, taking the lead and hiring our own. How many of us know we have a national First Nations bank in Canada? Right? Not very many people know that. How many know that we have an institute of excellent higher education in a university in West that is created by Indigenous folks, led by Indigenous folks, hired and employed all of Indigenous folks, right? How many of us know we have these therapist institutions that are out there that are just all Indigenous folks? We have lawyers, we have judges, we have people in these positions of power that have made their way into mainstream, which is wonderful. It's wonderful to see representation of your own kind in community. But our infrastructures in our organizations and our corporations are now recognizing, okay, this isn't moving as quickly as we want it to move, so we're going to change it ourselves. And they create these systems and these entities, these corporations, these organizations that are founded on Indigenous principles and are managed and led and have board of directors and executives that are all of Indigenous folks. This is happening. And this is a beautiful thing, because if we have to wait for the others to catch up on, we'll be waiting a long time. And we want to be able to take control of our own reality and our own destiny, not be dependent and or expect, and pardon me for saying this, for those who may be offended by this, the white hand to lead us. Right? It's a strong statement I'm saying. The white hand that leads us. From an Indigenous perspective, that is what we experience. And we should be eternally grateful when that happens. But my qualifications may not be no different than a non-Indigenous person's qualifications. You'll never see me in those positions. It's like the issues of our women against our men in the job market, the inequalities that exist with the job market and the pay scale for a equally qualified female versus an equally qualified male. Odds are, the reality is, the man is the one that gets it and gets higher paid. It's wrong. I'm not agreeing with it. It's wrong. It's the same view of how we are viewed in our community. So how does this all relate to Canada Day? Well, these are the issues that we are facing. And so when we start getting into all of these types of issues, you then get a little scope of why perhaps some of us may not be so eager to jump around and celebrate Canada Day. There's so much work to do. But at the same time, I've traveled abroad and I've seen the difficulties that other citizens in other countries experience. And when people ask me where I'm from, I will say I'm Canadian, because I don't need to get into the deep conversations of somebody who I don't know from another country. But I want to also acknowledge that although I am Anishinaabe that lives within the state of Canada, I have privilege that the citizens in other countries may not have the shared or the same privilege or the same treatment of that we do in our own country, right? I've seen people in other countries who don't have roofs over their head. Well, our country, we have Indigenous folks that don't have roofs over their head, but we do have freedoms. We do have a degree of freedoms in Canada being Canadian, whereas in other countries, not so much. Me as an Indigenous gay male, I have the double whammy behind me. An Indigenous male a gay male. These two issues together, it's very difficult to navigate in the world that views you as lesser than and one who should just disappear. I don't know how many times I've come in conversations with people who, and I don't live my life to satisfy anybody else's issues. As a gay male, that's my reality. That's my life. I embrace who I am. If that's a you problem, not a me problem. If you don't embrace me, that's not my problem, right? But that's because I'm now at the age where I'm at right now, where I have a different view of things. Whereas a teenager may not have the tools and the experiences to carry that type of confidence and know that they have worth. But, you know, aside from the issues that we experience as Indigenous folks in Canada, if we just look at the generalized definition of a Canadian citizen, which is encompassing of all of us, we do have freedoms. And I'm very grateful for those freedoms, right? I'm grateful that I can walk on the street 9 out of 10 times, not with a gun after me, right? We do have freedoms. And so when I look at the view of Canada from that lens, then I'm able to embrace some of the fireworks that go on, right? I'm able to embrace the celebratory actions that go on when I look at it from that view, right? But when I look at it through the Indigenous view, it may not be so. So we have to carry, most of us who are mixed heritage, a lot of people say that we have the beauty and the benefit of both worlds. Perhaps, but we don't use this term anymore, mixed or half-breed, but of mixed heritage. Even within the white community and the Indigenous community, we kind of have to find or navigate our way where we are acknowledged, and there is, it's just not easy on both ends, right? Working and living on the First Nation as a mixed person, lighter skin compared to my other folks in my community, may not speak as great of the language as perhaps some of them do, or may not know all the land-based teachings or the fishings and all that kind of. I never liked fishing to beginning anyway, so let's just be clear about that. I never liked getting my hands dirty. The scaly sliminess, no, fishing is out the window. But because I don't like fishing and because I don't know the greatness of fishing and the art of fishing, as an Indigenous person, people look at me and say, what kind of Indian are you? So there's that bias that happens within our own community. As a non-Indigenous person in non-Indigenous community, people sometimes don't know how to react to me because they don't know. So you don't see my tattoos or I'm not wearing anything. They don't know that I am half white and half Native. But the moment that they find out that I am half Indigenous, the tone changes, not for the better. It happens far too many times. And I think, Angela, I think I've spoken to you about this before. A perfect example is when I use my status card. Before I take out my status card for tax exemption on purchases, people are very pleasant and happy and engaging, and they're ready to punch in the numbers on the till. But the moment I say tax exemption and pull out my card, whoa, the tone changes as day as night. And the ignorance is in your face. And it is so obvious. So navigating through both worlds is at times challenging and difficult. But as I said, when I look at the lens of a Canadian citizen view lens versus an Indigenous lens, there's ways of navigating through that as well, right? Now, shifting to perhaps, I want to just briefly talk about, we'll go on a break here and we'll open up some questions. I mentioned reference in the beginning about the Wild Buffalo Bill days. And I'm not sure if I've ever spoke about this before, but a long time ago, I guess we're talking about Canada Day and its celebratory actions that go along with that. We see a lot of Indigenous folks doing performances on Canada Day, on the main stage at different events and festivals. And that's an individual choice. I don't have an opinion of that. But when we talk about the history of the Wild Buffalo Bill Days, and those who don't know this, it was when Wild Buffalo Bill used to have his little traveling circus, his entertainment. And he would, this is when it was legislated or okay in the States to capture, and just even the power of that word and what that means, to capture something, which oftentimes we think of an animal, right? So when it was permitted to capture an Indian, right? And then when it was legalized to scalp an Indian, they would get, I think, 25 cents or $1 or whatever the rate was at the time for scalping an Indian. That's a term that they use in their policy. So when we look at it, that timeline where people were given permission by the government to kill an Indian and scalp them and pull the evidence and bring the scalps to get paid, learn about this history for a moment. People think that Native people are the ones that do the scalping. That was never part of our practices. The scalping term came from white folks that was endorsed by the government of the United States as the head tax, right? And so non-Indigenous folks got permission to scalp Indigenous folks and got paid for it. But during that same timeline, capturing an Indian person during ceremony, because think about it, when we have our Indigenous folks in ceremony, there oftentimes involves drumming, ceremony of smudge and the use of the pipe and the feathers and dancing and food, or usually around a fire or around the water. So when you see that imaging of a Indian at that time, somebody had a business idea. Wild Buffalo Bill had a business idea because he already got permission from the government to capture an Indian, took them in their ceremonies, put them in cages, and traveled around in his show and barely fed them and released the Indians from their cages to dance. And if they didn't, they were killed and another one was replaced. So I'm sharing that because when we talk about Canada Day and we see our Indigenous folks, not just Canada Day, but also in productions and performances, that is where that history comes from. The performing of being a dancer on a stage for entertainment came from somewhere. And that came from the days of the Wild Buffalo Bill Days and the head tax process. And so when we look at Canada Day, I'm always reminded of that. That when I look at a dancer from my community on a stage that looks fantastic and wonderful and beautiful, and representation is everything, I oftentimes wonder, does that dancer know the history of where that performance came from? And so I think that is a really great opportunity to teach the large masses at a festival a little bit about that history and where it came from, but moving forward to where we are now, that we get to reclaim our places on our terms. Happy Canada Day, right? So these are the kind of thoughts that I have in my mind and where I think and my perspectives and a lot of my Indigenous colleagues who do the work that I do, they also share similar understandings of what I shared with you. But nonetheless, Canada Day is a very difficult day for some, especially those who are either starting out their healing journeys, starting out their journey of discovering who they are and their identities. It's a difficult process for them, for those who perhaps have been displaced, who have been placed in residential schools, or the 60 scoops, who've been adopted out, who've been incarcerated. It's a difficult time because those individuals, for some, it becomes a trigger. And when I look at, for example, some of us who have and continue to do the healing work, I'll use myself as an example. I am not perfect by any means. I am a man of many faults and also a potty mouth, by the way. But I'm on a Zoom call, so I'm trying to use my very nice, clean, professional voice. But even myself, where I've done some of the work on myself, and others like me, we are not defined by our hurts and our pains and our abuses or dysfunctions. We're not defined by that. Residential school does not define me and my family. The 60s group does not define who we are, right? Whatever difficulties that you're experiencing, you are not defined by that. And we need to understand that. But those who are in the beginnings of their healing journey may struggle with those realities of who they are and where they fit in society. And when Canada Day comes up, I oftentimes hear people say, I'm so embarrassed to be Canadian. No, you're embarrassed and hurt by the pains that you endured. There's a different conversation. And that you happen to be in a country with a leadership that doesn't truthfully and honestly speak the truth of the atrocities that have happened to our communities that resulted in the pains that you are going through. There's a difference, right? And so that is where those issues of anxiety comes from for some. I'm going to pause there.
Well, first of all,
chew on that for a moment.
Well, I'm gonna first of all say good job on the potty mouth. You're doing incredibly well. If that's a challenge for you. So you definitely get some kudos for that. I've been jotting down all kinds of notes, and I have I personally have a million questions and things I want to talk about, of course. But I'm going to start off with a couple of questions. If anybody has anything else, any questions they have, please again raise your hand or throw something in the chat. One of the things that I was really taken by, and I noted down where you talked about the fact that that there are families today that are still, the history isn't that old. No. And I know when I talk to folks about it, it feels like it's a million years away. It feels like it happened so many millions of years ago, and it didn't. You know, the 60s scoop. I mean, I was born in the 70s, but you know, we are the legacy of so many of these atrocities that have happened. And I found it really interesting that one of the terms that we hear a lot now is intergenerational trauma as it relates to Indigenous folks. And I know that people that I've spoken to, they really struggle with that concept of, you know, well, if those people aren't in your life anymore, how is that trauma handed down? And it's a little confusing for folks who don't have that connectedness to somebody who's lived through these sorts of things. How do you address that sort of question when people say, well, how can their trauma be affecting you in the concept of intergenerational?
And that all boils down to blood memory. The trauma and the experiences, either good or bad, trauma, especially trauma, is transferred through the blood. There's been scientific evidence of this. Therapists always speak about this. It's in our ceremonies. We speak about it. It's in our water ceremonies that speak about this. So intergenerational trauma, and if I'm going to make reference to what is in my bio, intergenerational knowledge transfer is no different than the transferring of those memories to the blood. You have the physical exchange of someone, either your parent, your grandparent, your great-grandparent, intergenerational knowledge transfer, but intergenerational trauma can also come from physical, but also come from blood, right? So, it's also in our eating for your blood type, right? Everything we speak about intergenerational trauma is the knowledge transfer of it through everything in our mere existence, our physical body. When you carry anger, it's right here. Scientifically, physiologically, the cortisol levels that are released from your brain go to the midsection, which create midsection weight, right? Especially in men. So even how we react to certain types of stimulus in whatever interaction we have, it'll affect us positively or negatively. And when you have a multi-generations of people who have experienced trauma, man, that's a difficult process to go through. I tell you that much. Listen, I never met my great-grandparents. I never even met my grandparents. I don't remember them as a child. And all of the atrocities and the harm and the pains and the trauma that they all experience, I don't know why, but I actually can, in ceremony, I feel that. And the elders always say, you are your ancestors. So if I am my ancestors, then I also carry to the mere essence of who I am and they are, and all of their experiences and all of their goods and bads and hurts and traumas, I am them too.
100%.
Right? And those who are, I'm going to use this word, pig-headed, that's the extent of my not so nice words today, who choose to be ignorant, who choose to be ambivalent, who choose to say that did not exist. I used to be bothered by that. I don't carry that no more. That's a you problem, not a me problem. And I know the history of my family. I know the history of the generations before me. And it makes sense as to why we are experiencing the residual effects of that trauma today. It's, even, for example, as a little boy, I remember having these dreams of people and these experiences of whom I've never met before. And having the conversation as a teenager or a young adult with my family members, they were saying to me how that is your great-grandfather you've described.
Amazing.
I've never seen photos of my great-grandfather. I've never seen how he was dressed. I've never seen any of the things that related to my older generations of my ancestors. And yet here I was able to speak to names, their temperaments, their characteristics, their mannerisms, and what they would even wear. So where does that information come from when I wasn't exposed to it physically?
Amazing.
Right? The spiritual world has a profound way of bringing information forward. Profound way. And that is what I will say to answer your question. That is my response, because I know the truth of my history. And that knowledge transfer is very much alive and well if you are allowing yourself to be in
Open
tune
to it.
with it,
Yeah.
right?
The other thing that I have found is it's the stories untold. And for those who know, you know people who are of Indigenous background, is that we're huge storytellers. I think EJ, you're
Yeah.
a great example of that. Great stories, great way of passing along information. But if you know, again, the history, and I speak about my own grandfather, and he wasn't in a community where there was a residential school, but they did have Indian day schools. And what that meant is
Mhm.
that you went to a school where you were forbidden to do anything that was cultural. Every day you couldn't speak your language. And when you went home, your parents were forbidden to do anything cultural, speak any of their language when you came
Mhm.
home. So there became this huge divide between the parents and the children. And people often talk about, oh, these reserves and people and the alcoholism and the this and the that. And I thought, well, when you talk about people that are being so beaten down in a society to the point where they have you just can't even live your life. You can't even speak to your children. They're now speaking a language that you don't even know, and you're forbidden. You don't know how to heal them because you can't use your healing practices. You don't know how to nurture them because you can't use, or you're doing it and feeling this tremendous amount of guilt, or as you've talked about before, fear of being persecuted or even killed for doing these actions within your own home or community. So it becomes this when I talk about my own grandfather, and that it becomes stories that were untold. And knowing now, when I look back behind those eyes, and I feel a tremendous sense of connectedness to him now. And I mean, he's long gone. But knowing there was so many more stories that I didn't
Yeah.
get to hear, and I didn't. And so when you think about that intergenerational trauma, it's the feeling cheated as well of and I'm going to other people to find my stories. Terry Jaffe, who spoke at one of our last sessions, she refers to herself as, I am a product of. And we used to hear people refer, and now we have a king, so it's a little different. But people would say, the queen's babies. And that, how many Indigenous children were the queen's babies because their life was being directed by these treaties and these contracts, as you say,
Yeah.
and violation of those. So it's an incredibly complicated thing.
Yeah. That is an appropriate word when your speaker spoke about product of, because I am the generation of my generation who are the children of residential school survivors. We refer to ourselves as, we are the products of residential school survivors. We are the products of. I am the product of a military man and all that goes along with that discipline and upbringing.
Mhm.
Right? We are all a product of something. It's like almost like we're a commodity of something, right? But it's just a play on words, but it is real. So again, some of you who are just joining in perhaps are probably wondering, what is this conversation about? Why are they talking about this? Oh my God, this is so dark and bleak and depressing and blah, blah, blah. This is about Canada Day. Happy Canada Day to you too. But it's important that we have these kinds of conversations, even if it makes us feel uncomfortable, because it's going to enhance your knowledge. Right? We want you to be able to walk away from today's conversation knowing that, oh my goodness, so this may make sense as to why this is unfolding, or why this is happening, or why people's views of Canada is this way. In order to understand something, you have to not understand it from a linear perspective. You have to understand it from a much more broader perspective. And all of us in this call come to the table with vast backgrounds and phenomenal different perspectives and upbringings from our ancestors. We come all packaged the way that we come. And some of those packagings are difficult to take apart, to unravel. The packaging sometimes may not be as folded so nicely and adequately, whereas some of the packaging might be just nice and flat and everything. But none of the day, once you remove the packaging, that is where the true history is. And we have to be able to have those conversations and acknowledge and embrace all that is. Listen, all the atrocities and the trauma that has experienced in my family, I used to be a person who used to point the finger and blame everybody. I used to be that person. That's coming from a place of fear, hurt, and pain. Nowadays, I could have open conversations about this stuff because it no longer burns me. I no longer allow it to manifest in me to take control. I use the experiences as an opportunity to teach, for people to learn, to understand truth, right? My truth and my family's truth and the generations before my mother's truths may differ from others, but this is the reality of our truths in our family, within our nation of people. And we mustn't just generalize, and we mustn't just take a cookie cutter approach to all of these stories. Because first of all, there are so many different stories and so many different experiences. Our experiences of the North are so completely different from those of the South. When I say South, I'm talking about the Haudenosaunee people, for example, right? Or the Ojibways from the South, or the Crees from the South. We're from north of Thunder Bay, so our perspectives, our experiences, our lived experiences, our whatevers are different. But at the end of the day, trauma and atrocities, hurt and pain and history, truth are what they are. And there's always a learning opportunity to learn from all of those. But I don't ever want anybody to ever walk away from today's conversation feeling defeated. Or you shouldn't have to feel like you don't have to celebrate Canada Day. Of course you should celebrate Canada Day. I don't want to disrupt that. That's not the nature of this conversation today, is to alter or change your view of Canada Day. That's not what this is about. This is about understanding the perspectives that perhaps some Indigenous folks have in their view of Canada Day. And to know that we may not all celebrate in the same way that we would like to, but we also must be able to acknowledge that we all have a responsibility to walk lightly, respectfully, and acknowledge that whoever you're engaging with, Indigenous or not, that we all have something to contribute to the table conversation. And there's beauty in that, and we all can learn from one another.
100%.
Right.
So here's another question that I get asked a lot. And as an artist yourself, a lot, I don't think that, and this is my own opinion, I don't think that there is any culture in the world that has been more co-opted when it comes to our crafts and our art and various items, our jewelry, all of these things. I mean, you can buy them in every tourist shop across Canada and in other countries. And I have a lot of folks who ask me often, is it okay, especially on Canada Day? You go to all these celebrations and somebody will have their wares out and there's a dream catcher for sale. There's beaded jewelry, there's a ribbon skirt, there's a ribbon shirt, there's all kinds of different regalia and crafts available. Is it okay to purchase these items? And if it is, how and why and where and all of that stuff? It's a big loaded question for you.
Yeah, and I think this kind of dabbles into the conversation of cultural appropriation. But let's hold off on that term for a moment. I think my view on that loaded question would be, what is your intention? What's your intention? Is your intention to purchase and support an artist that is producing a craft? That's great. Thank you. If your intention is to give pity because the poor little Indian on the street is selling their craft, we don't need your pity, right? Is your intention to learn and embrace something that is different? Great, thank you. Do that. Who am I to say no? So it all boils down to your intentions, right? And then shifting from the intentions, is it appropriate for someone to wear these items who is non-Indigenous? Of course it's appropriate. I don't have a say to say what is the clothes that you're wearing. Is it appropriate that you're wearing the clothes that you're wearing? No, I don't have that say and that right to do that. But again, it boils down to your intentions, right? Are you going to wear a ribbon skirt and all the beautiful jewelries that go along with that and go to a bar and be a drunk, and be completely inebriated and be a complete jerk? Because if that's what your intention is, then you have no business wearing these items, because you haven't done the work to educate yourself on these items, because these items are not worn in those environments, right? We look at ribbon skirts, ceremony ribbon skirts, the teaching of ribbon skirts and the skirting of our lodges and the protection of our women. And yet you're going to sport this in a bar and be a complete fool and be inebriated. It doesn't align with what the initial goodness of one's intention would be when sporting one of these items, right? Now, I get this all the time in my sewing group, and I have a couple of announcements in my sewing group about cultural appropriation, allyship, pretend Indians. Don't come into our space if your intention is to take advantage of something, appropriate what you've viewed in the group, which is oftentimes a sewing garment, produce it, profit off of it, right? There's where the conversation appropriation comes from. So the true definition of cultural appropriation is taking an item from a people, producing and profiting off of it at the expense of a people. Again, boils down to intentions, right? And so these are the conversations that we oftentimes hear in our communities. Is a non-Indigenous person permitted to wear these items? Yes, but there requires a educational piece, a conversation to educate the person of the potential buy. You may realize, whoa, this is far more than I expected. I'm choosing to opt out and not purchasing this. That is perfectly well. That is a respectful choice. You know, it's like you go to a dance performance or you go to a powwow and you see Indigenous folks dancing in their outfits. I hear this all the time. Oh, look at all those Indians dancing around like clowns.
Or in their costumes.
In their costumes, right? But there's an excellent piece to educate people on that. One, they're not costumes. Two, we're not dancing around like clowns. And two, we're in ceremony. And dance is ceremony, right? But we get people who just think that these items are just, I don't know what the word is. In my language, we have a word called I'm not even going to get into it because I can't even translate it. But the point is that yes, there are the conversations around who can wear and why and whatnot. But again, the shortest way to answer that is your intentions. And I have conversation. Ask people who you're purchasing or potentially purchasing off them if they could share with you perhaps a little bit of the story or the history or the meaning or the teaching of this item. Mm-hmm. We are storytellers, like Angela said. We are storytellers. We will gladly share with you that bit of information. What you do with the information is entirely up to you. Again, if it boils down to your good intentions.
Absolutely. Right? And what I've learned too is a lot of my experience has been that pieces of art that are created by my Indigenous family, there's so, when you speak about intention in our world, there's so much intention put into that. I mean, even when you make a tobacco tie and you see at the start of these, when I'm offering, it's comical that I'm offering them virtually a little bit. But when I'm offering a tobacco tie or a prayer tie, even when those are created, you're pouring in your intention. And I would never give a tobacco tie to somebody that I hadn't made and that it doesn't have all of my good thoughts and good spirit and my good intentions poured into it. So asking somebody Indigenous about their craft and what they've put into it, there's so much meaning. The color of the beads. I commented on your necklace that you're wearing at the start, and you talked about that your daughter and her partner had created it. And there's just so much meaning in every single piece of jewelry, everything. Ribbon skirts are so incredibly meaningful. I had a couple of ribbon skirts made as a gift to two family members recently, and each ribbon skirt holds so much meaning, about from the color that's used to the individual pieces of ribbon to every single piece that's in them. And like you said, it's intention, and it is just dripping with intention. There's a question in the chat here: is it okay for a non-Indigenous person to wear jewelry that was gifted from an Indigenous person?
Of course. Absolutely. And I like to use that. I'm going to go back to for example, the ribbon skirt, because that is a very popular item in today's culture right now, today's times. I make a lot of those. And regardless if it's a ribbon skirt or whatever I'm making, I'm very picky, maybe too picky. It's not about just making the quick buck. Right. And so I'm very selective and picky when I make an item for someone. One, it's a representation of me. And I'm infusing those, as you mentioned, intentions and those teachings and whatnot into the storylines of what my background is interwoven into these garments. So am I going to make something for someone who is just a crusty, miserable, evil, nasty person? You know these people in your lives that just give a lot of uck, right? And I'm sharing this because there's this person in the community who we don't get along, and I acknowledge that she and I are two different types of people. I'm not any better than she is. Well, maybe I am a little better than she is, because my behavior is not what she does, which is very toxic, right? I don't like to surround myself with toxic people. And yet this person is extremely toxic and was always getting so many people to ask me on her behalf to make her a ribbon skirt or a jingle dress, but didn't have the audacity or the respect to at least speak to me face to face and ask me. And I would never make this item for this person, because I don't want what the intention of this item is, which is supposed to be of goodness, to be in the possession of somebody who doesn't value that, right? So again, it boils down to your intentions. Whether you were gifted an item, whether you were purchasing an item, do the work, educate yourself, have conversations with whomever you are purchasing these items from or potentially purchasing, and from there make the decision whether or not it is for you or not.
Wonderful, wonderful. I was the United Way hosted its annual general meeting this week, and former Mayor Nenshi was one of the guest speakers, and he speaks about a time when he was gifted a headdress, and he really struggled with what to do with the headdress. And he said, I'm going to put it on display in a prized space in my home. And the person who gifted it said, "This is a gift from my family. And my intention is that you will wear it and you will do these things with it. Like I don't want it put on display in a space, in a place." But again, intention and appropriateness. And, he made a joke and he says, "Hey, I don't think I should wear it to the super center. I think there's going to be some challenges with that." And he was being much like you're saying now, is that the intention behind it. It's not something to be played with. It's not a toy. It's not a costume. I spoke in our last session, when Terry was talking, I immediately had a memory as a child that I buried this really deep, and I'm still looking to see if I have a photo, heaven forbid. 1 year on Halloween, my mom was gifted a costume, and the decision was made that I would dress up as a little Indian girl for Halloween because, of course, my people, right? And I was sitting in this last session we hosted, and I all of a sudden went, "Oh my gosh, I remember the fake long braids." And it caused me a tremendous amount of anxiety, and I'm going through my own process in dealing with that. But at the time, and I was very young. I feel like I was about 6 years old at the time. I remember my mom receiving these accolades that she was putting me out there in this costume. I don't know where the stuff came from. It could have been, genuine pieces. I don't even know. But to think back that it was treated in such a way, and the ignorance surrounding that is just mortifying for me. And yet also having been denied the opportunity throughout my childhood to have embraced that piece of my culture is just, ugh.
Yeah, man, not sure if you noticed my eye rolling when you mentioned
Yes.
that. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll very briefly speak to them. We'll go to the next point. Indigenous folks, not all of us are allowed to wear headdresses.
Mhm.
Let's be clear about that. And some things are not meant to be gifted, right? So if I'm just going to be pulling the Band-Aid off,
Mhm.
I don't believe that headdress should have been gifted from that Indigenous person to this non-Indigenous person. There would be a huge uproar in our community, because when we look at the teaching of the headdress, there's a huge teaching of it. And not even all of us Indigenous folks are permitted to even wear that, let alone a non-Indigenous person. So maybe, perhaps, yes, maybe the intention of the person gifting it was genuine and awesome and amazing. Great, good for you. But maybe the conversation with that Indigenous person may need to be had to enlighten them on the true teachings of that headdress and its significance, and who can and cannot be wearing one of these items. For some reason, for example, we'll go to the next point, but when the Pope came to Canada and he was gifted that headdress out west, a lot of us cringed when that happened. That should never have happened. The very system that tried to kill us is now sporting one of our most ceremonial, powerfulest items, as almost like it came across as a form of mockery.
Mhm.
That line has never been crossed. And I'm saying that now after having conversation with a friend of mine who is a doctor out in Edmonton, who's an Indigenous Two-Spirit doctor. And I voiced my concern about this. And I said, like, what is the matter with those Crees out in the plains? Why are they doing this? Because it always seems to be in our language, mushkegos, that give out the non-Indigenous folks these headdresses. Look at the Premier of Harper, or look at Trudeau, look at Chrétien. All these people were given headdresses from whom? From a nation of people that come from the Plains territory. And so when I asked my question, why did that take place when it should never have taken place? He also agreed, and a lot of the people in that territory agreed. It also came to be that the people who gifted that headdress to the Pope were the religious Indigenous folks, right? We do have religious Indigenous folks that follow religion, but may not know all of the teachings and the lines that are not to be crossed with their ceremonial items. And it's just almost a form of tokenism. And so there lies a greater need of conversation to enlighten even our Indigenous folks. Because let's face it, religion has no place in our ceremonies.
And there are a lot of people, as you mentioned, who have a very complicated. I know my grandfather was very, very Catholic. The children were often baptized Catholic, and it becomes a very complicated, interwoven complexity for them. We do have another question in the chat, and this is Eric. This clearly you are a history buff. So you spoke a bit about the agreement between the British and French after the battle at the Plains of Abraham. I was told that part of that agreement was that the French would help the British deal with the issues they had at the time with Indigenous people. Can you shed more light on that?
I can't speak to that because I don't know that detail. Okay. Other than I do know that Britain and France, when French people came from France and they created their homesteads in Quebec, the conflict between the two, that was the agreement, or that was the gift, I use it very loosely, the word gift, that the British gave the French, that they would allow them, because remember, Britain is the crown of Canada. And they gifted this territory of land to the French of what we now know as Quebec, with complete disregard to the original peoples there. So that is all I'll speak to on that issue, other than it's called the Friendship Treaty, and not so much friendship when you leave somebody out, right? But maybe we need to have further conversation on that another time. But it is something that not a lot of people know. It's not something that a lot of people in Quebec know. I mean, we talk about history.
Mhm.
We need to learn our own history first before we start pointing the finger and making conditions. Learn your history first. Just because we're in Canada and we are a melting pot of different kinds of backgrounds doesn't give us permission to completely ignore your true identities of where your original peoples come from, right?
Absolutely.
It's important that we need to do that. So I'll leave it at that. But thank you for the question. It is a juicy one, I think, indeed.
Absolutely. And very, I feel like I have to get out my history books to look some things up.
Happy Canada Day.
Absolutely. Well, I see now the clock has hit us at 11:30, and this is the time that we had scheduled to be here. This, I know for myself, has been a tremendous conversation. And I love that we spent a little bit of time on intention. And for those who've joined any other sessions that I've been in, I often talk about intention. I talk about my own personal journey and how we're all going to step in it. I step in it every day. But it is all about intention. And as you said, a responsibility to learn and want to learn, and not putting that burden on to our other Indigenous folks who live in our country, but choosing to take that responsibility on ourselves. And I see there's lots of thanks, lots of gratitude in the chat, which is tremendous. And any closing words, EJ, as we sign off for the day?
Oh, we're done at 11:30.
Would you like to keep going?
Oh, I was booked for 12.
Oh.
Hey. Just kidding. No, is there any other thoughts or questions that somebody wants to ask? Because now's the time to do it.
Sure.
Don't feel it's a silly question.
Yeah, and acknowledging folks if you need to sign off, because we did book it from 10 to 11:30. Totally understand.
Okay.
No, that's fair. And I'm not in any rush. So if there are any other questions from anyone else here who wants to jump in and ask anything, then by all means. I'm not seeing anything. I saw that Michelle logged in here, and one of the things that Michelle, I saw you commented in the chat about the lost story and history of our ancestors, and you had shared quite a compelling story about your cousins. I don't know if you have the ability to come off of mute, Michelle, or not, but in our last session, Michelle had shared quite an interesting story about her cousins that were adopted out. And the number of years it took as a family to find them. And when you talk about things like the 60s scoop and people who were just, oh, there's Michelle coming off of mute. I was watching to see. Michelle, do you want to share that? I mean, it was in a different session, and I think it's just such a compelling story.
I'm unmuted now, and I'm on King Street, so it's a little busy. My cousins, yeah, so they were adopted out. Their mother had died unexpectedly, which was my aunt. And my mom was, I'm going to say my mother was about 25 years old. She was engaged to be married, and she wanted to adopt her two nephews. And she did the paperwork, called Children's Aid. And by the time it was literally 1 week, and they had already been adopted out to some Catholic family somewhere in Kitchener-Waterloo. It took us until 1996 to find them. And I know that that weighed on my mother, and I know that she looked for them everywhere. And that at that time, I guess records were sealed through the Children's Aid. And there was no Native Child and Family Services, and there was none of that. So it was devastating for a lot of my family members. And we didn't find them until they were adults. And by that time, to rekindle or to get that relationship back, they're very damaged now. Those poor, my heart goes out to them. But yeah, so the intergenerational trauma that you spoke about is exactly that. Because you see my mother so pained by all of this that she really wanted them. And I could have had, older siblings, and I didn't. So anyway, it just speaks to that a lot. Thanks for sharing.
Sorry to hear that. And those are those truths. Those are those stories and experiences that we are hearing more of now, right? That people are sharing more, and this is that need for us to come together and embrace and kind of lift and support one another in that healing process. So it's not an easy process, I'll tell you that much. I've seen and heard many of my folks. I used to work for Native Child Family Services years ago, and those are the common stories then, and I'm sure they are now still, of people just reconnecting and trying to make kinship with one another, which is difficult. But I wanted to also mention, Angela, that what am I going to be doing for Canada Day? Well, I decided to go to Sandbanks.
It's my country, Prince Edward County.
Listen, I always gas up.
Leave now if you want to get in for Sunday.
Well, no. I always gas up on Marysville at Tyndonega for reserve gas. And not the smokes. I don't smoke. But I've always gone by there all the time. But I've just, in the last couple trips to Montreal and gassing up in Marysville, the sign says Sandbanks, 44 kilometers past the gas station where I go. I didn't know it was that location. So, and I just feel like I need to be by water.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Not Lake Ontario. Ew. Just not, I just want to be around that, right? Because Lake Ontario is very heavy in metals and water. But I want to go, I've heard so many beautiful things and seen photos of Sandbanks, and you and I have spoken, but I also have recently dated somebody, and we're going to do a road trip we ironically was going to say, let's go to Sandbanks. And then he says, well, what about let's go to Sandbanks? Like, oh my God, this is crazy. So we're going to go to Sandbanks, and I'm actually going to do, if the environment allows me to do a ceremony by the water.
Oh, wow. That would be absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. So that's my idea. And I've been really loaning to be around water now, knowing my mother had passed in the end of March. And so I really want to do that honor for her by the water. So again, we talked about what is Indigenous folks going to be doing on Canada Day. I'm going to be doing a ceremony by the water in a territory that is not traditionally mine, which is Angela's territory. And I, as a guest that is not Indigenous to that territory, have a responsibility to approach that intention respectfully, right?
Oh, wonderful.
So
well, you'll be walking in the footsteps of many, many of my ancestors. So
I'm excited to go. I'm just excited to go. So
it's absolutely beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. And now I'm jealous.
So
we do have a question.
Okay, good. But
just
just before,
yeah.
But the Sandbanks, though, is it like a very touristy place that be overpopulated?
It can be.
Oh,
yes,
okay. I'm not
on
camping.
a long weekend.
So
yes,
okay.
yes. We'll talk later.
Awesome.
So there is a question in the chat that says, my last question is, I'm always told that there were 6 genders in the Indigenous community. Can you explain anything about this topic? I've never heard that before.
Yeah, so it is understood that we have 6. The teachings will vary from region to region. So we have those who are identified as, if we look at trans community, for example, the trans community. So we have ones who represent more of females and ones that represent more of males. So just in that dynamic, we also have two genders there. I'm not explaining this correctly because it's a very difficult, it can be a very difficult concept to kind of grasp. So as we all know scientifically, our biological makeup is male and female, right? Our chromosomes are male and female that make up the physical body that we are in today. And so traditionally and spiritually, we have a view of EJ appears to be male, but identify more female, for example. Or EJ appears to be male and identifies more as male. Okay, so genderism is not so black and white when it comes to Indigenous views, where mainstream straight world heterosexual understanding is you're either a male or a female, done. We don't have that view. So we also have those who are two-spirited, that, and this is where a lot of people get confused. They think, well, if EJ is male presenting but identifies more female, isn't he two-spirited? No. We have those who are two-spirited from a spiritual view, have the ability to possess both male and female spiritual essences. So there's three conversations we're actually having here. Is gender identity, sexual identity, and spiritual identity, right? And those three are very different. Then you get into a cis male and a cis female. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, two-spirited, 5. And I'm not sure of the sixth one. I've heard there was a sixth gender. I've never known it to be a sixth gender. I only know of 5. And so that there lies my teaching now. And there's my ability to learn more on that conversation. But I only know that there is male, female, 2, presenting more male, presenting more female, 3, 4, and two-spirited, 5. Although two-spirited is more of a spiritual identity rather than a gender identity and a sexual identity. So it is confusing. I'm looking at all the faces that are on the screens. They're like,
and I'm
right?
feverishly Googling things. Let me just tell you.
So here's a really good one. So there are the Hopi people, HOPI, or the Arapaho people. So and also the Navajo people of the New Mexico, and also the Pueblos. So if we look at that region of people in, say, Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma area, that whole region, this is where I've learned of the 5 genders that exist from those people that are very adamant about those teachings. So if you were to Google anything, Google Indigenous, I'm just guessing on top of my mind here, Indigenous perspectives on 5 genders. Maybe something will come up. But if nothing does come up, Google Hopi, Pueblo, Arapaho, Apache people with regard to gender roles, right? Gender identities. And there's something that could pop up.
Yeah, there's definitely some really interesting stuff online.
Yeah.
Like that.
So
Yeah,
and there used to be societies, especially under the Hopi people and the Zuni people. That's the other one, Zuni people. Zuni and Hopi are very closely like sistering nations.
Okay.
And also the Pueblo people. But there used to be actual societies of I'm going to use the word two-spirited loosely because two-spirited is a relatively new term since 1999. in 1997. But that whole teaching of two-spiritedness will have their own geographical views of their teachings and their words from those people. And if we look at the Hopi, oh, what is her name? It's escaped me. There's an individual that has, you know, Princess Leia and her hairdos, right? With the big, large, flat disc buns. That was the inspiration that came from the Hopi people. And the Hopi people have the two-spirited people that the men would wear because they identify more female. They would wear their hair like that. That's that inspiration where that came from. So if you kind of dabble in that area of searching, a lot of information should come up. And there's so much information to learn about that.
So this is how I'll be spending Canada Day.
Yes, there are 5 genders. I've never heard of, and maybe there is 6 genders, but I've only heard of 5. But remember though, gender, sexual, and spiritual identities are all 3 different things.
Amazing.
Right?
Excellent. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I'm always amazed that when we do these sessions, I learn so much, and it's from the most interesting of places. I love the questions that people ask and that they challenge us to think about things differently and dig in a little bit deeper. Anybody else have any other comments, questions? I think we've addressed everything over in the chat. And other than that, I think that I'd like to say thank you to everybody for joining all the sessions this month. Thank you for those who have chosen to step up as allies at Community Living Toronto and in other organizations, as well as those of you who do have Indigenous heritage and are also coming out of the shadows and joining me and a few others and Michelle specifically on our journey, and hoping to help Community Living Toronto to chart the course for our own journey as an organization, so that we can do better and with our Indigenous friends and family across Canada, but most specifically in Toronto. So thank you to everyone, Nawagoa, and any other closing remarks, EJ, while we let everybody go and get ready to have some lunch?
No, I don't, other than enjoy your weekend, enjoy your holiday, however you choose to enjoy yourself, embrace yourself, know who you are, where you come from, and to know that we are all a part of the larger community.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day and a great long weekend. Be safe.
Mamapi.